If you're new to cooking with venison or you just want some easy recipe ideas, I've got 5 ground venison recipes that should be ready in 30 minutes. Stick around to the end because you will not want to miss this appetizer that I'm going to show you. If we haven't met yet, I am Junie and welcome to my wild kitchen. You might as well subscribe because we're basically besties now. Let's get cooking. Let's start this video out with our Wednesday night staple, spaghetti bolognese. Whenever I make pasta, I always like to add salt, olive oil, and some minced garlic into the water. It helps everything to not stick together and it really heightens the flavor of the pasta itself. It is lovely. For our family, I don't generally mess with the seasonings of my pasta sauce, but I definitely mess with the different ingredients that I put into it. For this meal, I added peppers and onions and garlic. Sometimes I throw in spinach. Sometimes I'll even be crazy and grate up a carrot. It really just depends on the day and how I'm feeling. But here I am sauteing that onion and that garlic till they are nice and fragrant. I do the onion first, the garlic second. For our staple dried herbs that we absolutely love, I use a ton of basil, parsley, and thyme. I season all of that good with salt and pepper, and then I add a little bit of butter to the pan and do something crazy. If you have never sauteed your herbs with your onions and garlic before you add your meat, you need to try it. It really just opens up that flavor and makes things so beautiful. I'm using a 1.5 pound bag of ground venison because that is what my family is eating nowadays. We cannot just do 1 pound of meat. That's not going to work. As you saw, I drained and rinsed my pasta in cold water, then I put some olive oil back in it and started working on the sauce. I mixed and sauteed in some tomato paste to open up that flavor. I added some crushed tomatoes, a can of mushrooms without the water, along with my peppers. And if your sauce is too thick, add a little bit of water. If your sauce is too acidic still, then add a little bit of sugar. And what's pasta without some garlic bread? Mix together some softened butter, minced garlic, parsley, and a little bit of thyme to go along with our pasta sauce. And it was lovely. I used some buns that we had left over from lunches. I would have used a loaf of bread. It really doesn't matter. Bread is bread. It's still great. I preheated my broiler and put them in there for 1 minute to 3 minutes. Your oven might be different, so just watch them. And if you want to be super fancy, you could add some cheese on top. I threw on some dried parsley, and if I had any Parmesan, that would definitely be going on there too. But there we go, a nice, tasty, hearty meal to warm up your heart and your belly. Let's get into some simple venison comfort food. This was a recipe my grandma always used to make, except she used ground beef. There was no recipe, but I just remember what it tastes like, and this is pretty similar to that. I ended up cooking up 2 bags of ground venison because I wanted to use the second bag for the appetizer at the end of the video. After the meat was done browning, I separated it into 2 equal portions, which ended up being 1.5 pounds each. To the meat left in my pan, I added a can of mushrooms along with the water, a packet of brown gravy mix, 1/2 cup of beef broth, and some water along the way. I wanted to bring out the oniony flavor a little bit more, so I added some dehydrated onions. Or if you didn't have any of that, you could add some onion powder. I added in some garlic as well because we just love garlic around here. I needed this to be saucier, so I added some more gravy and some more water to go along with it. I left that simmering on the stove covered for about 15-20 minutes while I worked on everything else. Here I'm puncturing some potatoes. I'm going to heat them up in my microwave because that is quick and easy. I'd love to try them in the crock pot at least once in my life, but I would definitely need to remember to put them in the crock pot. That would be helpful. If you don't want to do a baked potato and you want to do mashed, or you want to do some other kind of potato, or not even potato at all, go right ahead. Your meal, your way. However, I did get some high praise from my son when he said that this was probably the best meal that I have ever made. So I think that's saying something. Let's cook some venison mac and cheese goulash. I used 2 pounds of my ground venison with onions and garlic from my 15 pounds of pre-cooked stash in my freezer, along with a can of tomato sauce, a can of diced tomatoes, and a couple cups of water. Think of this as a wild hamburger helper. That's what my husband said that this tasted like for supper tonight, which I felt was a win. You're going to bring that to a simmer and then add in your 2 boxes of KD pasta, or if it's no name, whatever kind of box pasta you want to add in. If you want to keep it simple, don't add all these herbs, but I really enjoy amping up the flavor, so I put in some basil, some parsley, and some thyme. Don't worry, all those measurements will be down in the description below. I added Worcestershire because it helps to bring out that beefy flavor, and be as generous with the garlic as you or your family likes. I seasoned everything with salt and pepper, and then I added only like 4 drops of liquid hickory smoke. I closed it up, turned the temperature nice and low, and let it simmer for 8 to 10 minutes just until the pasta was cooked. And now the fun begins by adding those 2 packets of cheese. Even before I added the cheese, it was tasting pretty dang good. This last step is totally optional depending on your preference towards cream cheese. I added half a block, but if you don't like it, don't add it because it still tastes great. Testing and trying new recipes in your house can sometimes be a little bit scary, but don't worry, just take it slow and taste as you go. If Gordon Ramsay has taught me anything, it is always taste your food before you give it to people. I had doubled this recipe, so we had tons of leftovers, but you don't have to. Let me tell you though, it's totally worth it. If you're in a hurry, just make venison curry. I do have to tell you, the nice thing about this recipe is I first learned it in the crock pot. So if you want to do it in the crock pot, you totally can. It is amazing. The recipe and all the deets will be down in the description. And ever since I learned how to make rice in the Instant Pot, I have not gone back to the stove at all. We use parboiled rice. It's equal parts rice and water. I put some butter and some salt, and then that's it. 7 minutes on high pressure and you're done. Since that rice was ready to go, I started on cutting up my onions. I gotta be honest, this was the first time that I've ever had cauliflower in this recipe, but I was not disappointed. It was great. As you can tell, our cauliflower was in the fridge for a little while, so it definitely needed to be used for something. I cut the cauliflower up into about 1.5 inch cubes, and then I decided to just put it in the microwave and heat it that way. It was easier, and I didn't have to think about taking stuff in and out of a pan. It was just, yeah, simple. However, if you did decide to do cauliflower on the stove, you could put it in with the onions at this point, and then remove it before you put your venison in. I sauteed those onions and garlic until they were fragrant and then added my venison. When I made this in the crock pot, I just did it with cubed venison, and that worked great too. In a pinch, this sauce is amazing. It's not just for chicken, obviously, it works great with deer too. At this point, you just start adding everything together. The cauliflower, the cream that you're supposed to put with this sauce. I rinsed out the jars with a little bit of water, and it was great. You let it simmer for about 10-15 minutes and you're good to go. And look at this rice. It is a little bit sticky, which our family really doesn't mind, and we just love it. And what better thing to have with some curried venison than a nice fresh piece of naan? I found the simplest, like 15-minute recipe, and it just uses baking powder, no yeast. It's a really wet dough. You gotta work it, and it comes together pretty good, but it's quite sticky, so you just got to be aware of that. I've made tortillas a couple times, so this kind of reminded me of that. The dough, however, was so much easier to roll out. There wasn't any resting time needed. You just try and get it as flat as you can, and then you put it in a pan without any oil in it. You got to make sure your pan is hot, and then once it gets a little bubbly, you flip it over, let it get bubbly again, and then you're good. It ends up being about 30 seconds to a minute each side. And there you have it, our beautiful dish. If you've never eaten curry before, you really should give this a go. It has so much flavor, a little bit of heat. It is definitely worth it. Out of all the recipes I showed you today, this one is probably my ultimate favorite. And it's pretty easy because you don't have to make your own biscuits. We start off in our own usual way, except this time there's no onions. And I'm definitely loving my enamel cast iron cookware here. It's awesome because I did not have to take it out of this pan to put it into a casserole dish. I just put this right into my oven. Phenomenal. I love one pot wonders like that, don't you? As you saw, I added some butter to the pan, and then I added my whole can of tomato paste, along with the taco packet. I normally use my own taco seasoning, but I didn't have any on hand that time. I added 2 tomato paste cans of water. I actually end up adding a third one, as you can see, along with just over half a cup of salsa. Haha, yes, be warned, sometimes that happens with your biscuits and you get some gray hairs, so just be aware. You're going to take each biscuit and cut it into quarters. Make sure that you cut them individually so then you're not having to try and separate 2 biscuits that are smushed a little bit. Stir your biscuits into your mixture, making sure that they are all separate and that they have not somehow gotten stuck together. Once everything's good, pop it into a 375-degree oven for about 20 minutes. So feel free if you want to tidy your kitchen, drink a coffee, you know, chat, do some laundry, whatever. Or you could shred your cheese to get ready. Because oh my goodness, doesn't that look amazing? You just coat those biscuits with all that cheese, put it back in the oven for about another 5 minutes to melt it, and then I broiled it for about 1 to 3 minutes after that, and it was delectable. When I tasted this before I went to work, I'm like, can I just sit with my plate right now and just finish all of it? But I didn't, because I was going to save it for supper. It was so good. Those biscuits were so flaky. They were just on the mark. You do not want to miss trying this recipe because I think it could be a family favorite. Okay, so I've got this appetizer I want to show you. It's queso. Venison queso. It's so good. This actually will not require you to do anything on your stove other than brown your meat and, you know, saute your onions. Everything else is going to happen in your crock pot, which is kind of refreshing. It also makes sure that when you're going to use this queso for a party, it can stay warm the whole time. You're just going to throw everything in your pot. Your meat, your tomatoes with chilies, your salsa, corn, black beans, some chopped up Velveeta cheese, which I didn't think that I would really love in here, but I was definitely wrong. I used up some taco seasoning and then mixed everything together. This has just got to be left on low for between 2 to 4 hours until that cheese melts and everything is incorporated, just like that. And already it was smelling amazing. And then you go and do this. You just add a bunch more cheese to it. And then it's like over the top, over the moon. After 30 minutes, the queso is ready. And boy, was I also ready to eat the queso. Holy moly, I loved it. I really hope you enjoyed this video, that it gave you lots of different ideas to try out and made cooking with venison a little less daunting. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the video next week where I'm going to share a whole bunch of venison appetizers with you. Thanks for watching. Happy cooking.